Hey,
Hi.
how's it going?
Good, thanks. I'm glad that all worked quite smoothly.
Just say that's probably the smoothest anyone's ever joined me. So good work on that. And
Great.
we've been we haven't done one of these for a while either. So I'm a little bit out of practice. So thanks for making it smooth for me too.
Okay, great.
Well, I just take this second just to welcome people who are joining us. So this is In Conversation. And as I say, we've had a bit of a summer recess, but we're back with a bang. Going to have a lot of exciting guests joining me over the coming month or over the coming few weeks to celebrate Black History Month and to talk about various works and different things. I'm very excited to be joined today by Dr. Adesola Akinleye. So welcome and thanks very much for your time. We're going to talk about your research. We're going to talk a little bit about like your practice. We're going to get into a few different topics. But to begin with, I guess just a brief introduction. You're an intellect author. You're a self-described, I believe, interdisciplinary artist, scholar, activist, and choreographer. And you've had a long and diverse career, it seems, as well. And I know that you've produced a number of live performances that are often site-specific and involve broad sections of the community. I know that you've also made films, you've been a dancer, choreographer, and of course you're fairly prolific as a scholar. So we're very glad to have you on today. But first of all, where are you calling in from?
So I'm in Texas, although my background makes me look like I'm in Scotland or something like that. Yeah, I'm at Texas Women's University. I've just moved here, so yeah, it's quite exciting.
Brilliant. How's things there? That must be quite a big change moving it sort of as we're sort of coming out of the pandemic as well.
Yeah, it has been quite strange. It's very warm. Like I wasn't expecting it to be warm for such a long time, so that's nice. Today's
Oh,
the first day it's rained.
okay.
Yeah.
What part of Texas are you based in then? Where's I'm not familiar.
Um, it's in Denton, which is just north of Dallas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, how long have you been there?
About 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks.
Oh, so you did catch the sort of August, September heat wave.
Yeah, it's quite nice to have a little bit of summer. Because before that I was in London, so we had like odds and ends of sunshine. Yeah.
Yeah. And where are you from originally?
So I grew up in London. I'm sort of from London, but I've spent quite a lot of time in the States and in Canada. So I'm a bit transitory. I've kind of moved around quite a bit. Yeah.
That's really cool. When did you first make it across the pond?
Yeah, so that's sort of like part of my dance, my sort of history of dance, of me, is I moved to Dance Theatre of Harlem when I was 19 to join the workshop ensemble. And that was actually, like kind of resonates with some of the publications because I kind of left England because the sort of general consensus from teachers and organizations was that I wouldn't be able to continue to do ballet or do ballet professionally in England. So there were a few people that at that time that from England that moved to America for that same kind of reason. England lost quite a few dancers. And just to sort of note that Leonora Stapleton just recently passed away, and she was one of our, another English dancer that really contributed to the dance field and was particularly recognized in America more so than in England, but a really amazing dancer and a real loss to our community as dancers.
Wow. So I mean, that's kind of crazy. So coming over here, well, I'm in New York, so I say coming over here. I'm
Yeah.
based, that must have been an incredible formative experience, sort of uprooting and then being up there in Harlem.
Yeah, and it really was because I totally wanted to be a dancer. I trained to be one, and at the end of your training, often you get some sort of advice on what you should do next. And my advice was to stop dancing. But the Dance Theatre of Harlem were on tour, and that summer that I graduated, and I did a class with them at the Coliseum in London. There was an open class and I was able to do class, and I kind of spoke to Arthur Mitchell afterwards, and he encouraged me to come, he suggested that I come to Dance Theatre of Harlem to work there. And that was great, because I think whenever you're met with kind of prejudices where people can't see in you what you see in yourself, and just to sort of jump into, which is why the Reclaiming Ballet book is that it's about different identities, about queer identities and ethnic identities, that all of those where other people won't see you for how you see yourself. Having someone affirm that they can see that in you is really rejuvenating. And that was one of the things that Arthur Mitchell was so brilliant at, which was sort of seeing in people their potential, and working with that and encouraging that. And I think that's how the form grows, when you have that vision to sort of see in people what could be.
So a couple things there to unpack. So first of all, we're going to get into the book more directly in a short while. But of course, you've published a book recently with Intellect, which is called Reclaiming Ballet, which kind of looks at marginalised voices and I suppose an alternative history of ballet as an art form. And it's a fantastic reference guide and also very important work and research. So we're definitely going to get into that. And I would also like to talk about some of your other books that you've published with other companies, because I think you have a long history of publishing very important research in this area. But it might be interesting just to unpack a little bit here about some of the prejudices you experienced. So are you saying that effectively at the time when you were kind of, in your late teens there, you were basically told and advised you were unable to continue as a ballet dancer within the UK just because of prejudice, effectively?
Yeah, and I don't think that's a unique experience. I think a few people have had that experience, but yes, that's sort of the long and the short of it. Yeah, and I think what I'm saying is that a few people have had that experience. So it's not the uniqueness of the experience, but it's the sort of the lesson learned of how important it is for you to sort of follow what you feel you have a voice in, like the importance of expressing yourself with the voice that you feel belongs to you, was the sort of learning from that I got. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not so much the trauma of that happening, which I think a lot of people have different traumas in different ways around belonging in dance and belonging in ballet. But the sort of the thing to learn from that is how crushing it can be for next generations when you have a preconceived idea of a mold that they need to fit into, rather than having dance be alive in the people that are doing it.
And that's interesting. So at the time, though, there was obviously the Harlem, the Dance Theatre of Harlem, and probably other groups as well in New York and elsewhere. But they were much more open-minded. I assume, was this kind of like a black theatre company? Just thinking of the makeup of Harlem, and was it sort of self-organised? Was that a big difference that you found between maybe the UK and the US? That there was more of a community and that they were sort of self-organising and kind of just doing it themselves?
Yeah, I think funding has a big implication here. So Dance Theatre of Harlem was created by Arthur Mitchell and Carol Shook, and is a ballet company that has a range of different skin colors in it, but primarily black, and Arthur Mitchell is an African American. So America has got a longer history of established sort of funded companies than England has, I think. At the time when I was 19 and moved to America, the Arts Council, which is how a lot of English funding is through the Arts Council, whereas in America it's sort of private entities. The Arts Council had a policy that companies needed to have at least one black member. But what that ended up meaning was that once there was a black member in a company, that was it. like everyone had their black dancer, and that was that. So sort of part of the sort of advice of you won't be able to dance here is that, you know, we've got most companies have now got their one black dancer, so that, you know, there's no more space. So that kind of policy ended up creating, you know, almost a worse circumstance than if it hadn't been there, I suppose, or something like that. And I think we still suffer from that a little bit, a sense that if there's one sort of token individual in any organization, that means then that there's some kind of animosity or like non-welcome for any more people that look like that, instead of that sort of idea of kind of opening the doors. So it's quite a divisive tactic in the end.
And I mean, I'm assuming that things have changed quite significantly since you began as a dancer. But I know you went back to Europe, right, and danced with a number of other companies based in London. Was that because you'd achieved enough success and experience in the US, or have things shifted, and did you feel more welcome in the community?
I think it was because I missed being in London, and I felt a little bit like I did definitely feel as if I had to choose between the sort of home space of people and family that sort of nurture you, or dance. And dance was in America. And I think as a young person, I sort of needed to come back to my family and friends and that familiarity. So that, I think that's really why I came back and ended up joining those companies. And what I've been lucky enough to do is leave again and come back and leave and come back, because I actually think I've spoken to other people of my generation also, that you almost need to kind of leave and kind of fill yourself up a little bit and get on with the work, and then come back to England for and then so it sort of comes to a certain point where you need to go again and like fill up again. And part of that is often one is more accepted where as something different when you're an other person anyway. Like often there are American dancers that maybe have been able to do more in England than they would have done in America, and vice versa. So that kind of otherness of coming from another place sometimes helps you break down boundaries that you wouldn't be able to do when you're sort of homegrown. So I think I've been quite lucky in setting my life up so I've been able to go sort of back and forth from places.
It's something I can I'm familiar with as well myself. So I've been transatlantic for much of my career within publishing, and I think there's something rejuvenating about it, and there's definitely pros and cons of both systems from my perspective, from publishing and academia. But yeah, there's definitely, I find it's quite revitalizing and recharging to have that opportunity to be with different people, different cultures. And yeah, it's a big difference between London or New York, and then more rural England and things like that, where there's lots of interesting work taking place as well. But it's a very different experience navigating those different kind of cultures and things.
Yeah.
So it seems you've had a very diverse career, and wear many hats and still do, it seems. But you began as a dancer. What was your sort of formative experience or training? How did you get into dance? Can you remember what drew you to it? And did you have the traditional kind of pathway?
Yeah, so I think I got into dance through watching musicals on. I'm of the time when they used to be on BBC Two on a Saturday. So I used to watch musicals, and then I wanted to. We did English country dancing in my primary school. That yeah. So and I joined. I got interested in dance through those kind of avenues, and then also I had a teacher that taught some classical Indian dance to us in my primary school, and we performed that. I think it was my first performance experience. And then I joined a sort of after-school program. So I kind of come from quite a community dance background, as it were, because I joined an after-school program, And then when it was time to go to secondary school, I went to a secondary school that had a quite a well-established dance program called Tower Hamlets Girls' School. And that's where Linda Robinson and Hilary Ball were, and they directed this company called London Youth Dance Theatre. So London Youth was sort of a company that was housed in the school but had young people from all over London as part of it. And we used to practice all day on a Saturday, but we were working, we'd have classes in the morning and then rehearsals, but we were working with like people like William Luther and Janet Smith and Deirdre Lavelle. So we had these amazing artists working with us as sort of young people.
That's very cool. I'm sure that again is not an unusual pathway, but for me, maybe it's again, it's that rural versus London situation. I was raised in Devon, so in the rural community for all of those out there who are not from the UK. But yeah, dance was always an elective thing. It was after school clubs, and then I guess then it was also, this is one of the things I want to talk to as well about, maybe there's a class thing comes in, because a lot of those extracurricular classes, whether they be in sort of modern or ballet, the kind of more traditional, they were quite expensive and costs were definitely prohibitive. So I guess it shows the difference that there's an issue there between, you know, rural versus city. Another kind of issue that probably comes up, and I imagine again that's changed a lot. And I know that people like yourself have done a lot of work to try to engage with not only different communities but also with youth, and that's something that we can definitely discuss. How would do you what styles of dance do you now, or have you performed all across the board, or were you more specifically a trained ballerina or ballet dancer, I should say?
Yeah, so I've sort of trained in Graham technique and ballet primarily through my sort of formal training, but
as in Martha Graham.
Martha Graham, yeah, technique, but I think I'm interested in the body as a kind of moving, expressive way to understand the world. And so I feel, I suppose I feel like dancers are a bit, should be a bit like plumbers. Like you need to know a little bit about the whole system. You might have a sort of speciality, but you need, if someone needs to call in a plumber, you expect them to have a little bit of knowledge about everything, not just only be able to do one thing. So I feel like my interest is in how the body kind of expresses itself through movement and engages with the world through movement, and then particular techniques like ballet or Graham show you a way to have a position to look at the world from, but they're not the dance itself. The dance itself is in how you speak through your body. So I'm interested in dance, and then I have some techniques that help me decode what that means a little bit. And now I think I'm going into being an older dancer. It's quite interesting because it's not like I've always known, I've done ballet for a long time. My body's changing, like the way that a teenager body is changing. And so the movement and the technique means something different in my body as it changes, and reveals different things. And then other techniques that I learn and engage with also do the same thing, like reveal different knowledges about my body, and then at the same time my body's changing, and that's revealing different knowledges about the dance. So it's an ongoing exploration of what it means to feel and move.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And are there any sort of styles or techniques you most enjoy, or is your work, I've heard it described as transdisciplinary, and I imagine that's outside of just the art of dance more generally in somatics, but yeah, would you say that your own practice is generally informed by these different styles, or do you, this is something you prefer, or you have a favorite to return to back again and again?
Yeah, so I think that transdisciplinary thing comes in here because what I'm really interested in is this idea of place and being connected to the environment around you, and how dance, sort of different dance techniques and different engagements with dance are about how you're present in the space that you're in, and how you are connected to that. And that's also how it becomes transdisciplinary outside of dance as well, because I think there are sort of shared interests with this idea of placemaking. And you know, noticing from things that I write that I'm quite I've kind of drawn a lot on less Western constructs and more maybe Indigenous and Africanist constructs, and quite strongly within a number of Indigenous constructs are that we're not disconnected to the rest of the world, that we're responsive, and that we're response able, and we're a part of everything. So that's that idea of place being different from space, but something that you're kind of creating with the sum of everything, and your moving body is part of that sort of dialogue. That's what I'm interested in.
Cool. No,
really. So I guess what I'm saying is that the sort of the inspiration to move then is from the gathering or the sort of assemblage of where you are, like from the environment or the group of people that you're with. So it's interesting to learn the dances of people as well, because that sort of means that you learn the sort of perspective or the engagement that that group of people have. And I think that especially younger people or sort of social dancing is really important to learn, because it sort of tells you a little bit about what that younger social group is seeing themselves, or how they're identifying themselves. So although I know things like ballroom and voguing and things like that, they're not that younger dances, but they're sort of more sort of associated with young people. And I think that sort of dance is really important.
Interesting. I was going to say, often your work's described as site specific, and that kind of links in with what you're saying too, right? So for anyone out there who doesn't really know what that sort of entails, you just explain a little bit about what site specific means to you, and how that kind of embodies, I guess, the sort of your motivations and your inspiration. Yeah,
so sort of traditionally, site specific might mean a site as in not a stage. I'm sort of seeing site specific as meaning more about the way that you're engaging with the space around you. So everything being a site. So a stage is a site, or like the woods are a site. But the idea of site specific is that what you're doing is specific to the space that you're in, to responding to the space that you're in. So it's never that you would have a dance and you could just place it in its entirety without any change in place A, and then it would be exactly the same when you put it in B. But rather that when you're dancing, you're engaging with the space with what's around you. So it changes. It's specific to where it is happening. Which means that sort of for me, site-specific also means a kind of a little bit of an including of the communities of people that are in the places that you are dancing.
Well, that's a really clear and interesting definition. Thanks for providing us with that. Speaking of that, though, are there any particular, I suppose, sites or spaces, sites as you described it, that you would highlight where you particularly enjoyed or had sort of liberating experiences? Anything you would like to, any special moments for you in your dance career?
Yeah, I really like. So another interesting thing is seeing things, space and time as being connected. So like the sort of 4-dimensional space, which includes time. So I think doing something a number of times in the same place, so sort of dancing over time in the same geographic location is I'm really interested in doing that. And with Dr. Helen Kindred and Dancing Strong Movement Lab recently, for instance, we were dancing by the River Thames over a period of time through whenever we were allowed out from lockdown. So we sort of did it in December and then a few days over the following June. And sort of one started to build a relationship with the environment just through coming back and dancing there again and again. So much so that I was walking at another point, I was just walking somewhere for an appointment past the Thames, and I suddenly heard the waves, and it was like hearing an old friend. Like I could feel that physically, because I'd just been sort of dancing for the last few weeks every day to the music of the waves. I now heard the voice of that in my body. So I think engaging with a place to the point where you start to sort of have a sense of yourself in it, like what you do to it and what it does to you. I think that's really interesting to me at the moment. And we are, with Dancing Strong and with Dr. Kindred, we are doing looking at making work that sort of extends over time and space, that people can engage with, thinking about the lockdown and Zoom and the way that people are starting to engage with the internet differently, that we don't want to, I don't want to make dances that are dances but happen to be on a computer screen. I think it calls for us as kind of choreographers and dancers to look at how can we be present across the sort of the time of the internet, or across the engagement of internet. People are engaged like with Instagram for a few seconds and then a little bit later in the day. And how do we make work that speaks to that kind of engagement and doesn't impose on people a different scenario, like you have to sit and watch this for 2 hours like you would in a theatre. It's a different experience. So I think that's quite exciting to see how we move with technology and challenge time.
That's really interesting you raised that, because I did want to ask you later in the conversation, but I think we'll jump in there, about some of the challenges that dance and you as a dancer and practitioner and teacher faced during the pandemic. And I've had a few other dancers on here over the year, and it was always interesting to see how they were engaging with technology and with the virtual side, if you will. Do you think there's it sounds like you've seen some silver linings there, and like there's room for kind of adaptation, and also to perhaps engage with new communities and people who may not have perceived dance or had the capacity to engage with it in the same way that they could do now. And I guess, just what are your thoughts on that more broadly? And if there's anything interesting that we should be aware of, maybe that you took part in, or any interesting experiences or silver linings that you've encountered as a result of us being out of those more traditional dance spaces.
Yeah, so artistically, what I was really interested in was the glitch. Like, I'm really interested in the kind of glitches in things. So I did quite a lot of work with Zoom, because Zoom was kind of new to me. I'd been using things like Skype before, but Zoom's interesting because it has this background that doesn't understand what a human being is. So so you can, and it kind of speaks to a little bit what I was saying before, like how do you recognize a person? Like how do you like when I was moving to America, how were the people that said I couldn't dance, how do they recognize, oh, that's a dancer? It's the same as what Zoom's like, oh, I can't see you. Like as a black woman, a lot of times I fade into the background, or I can't be seen, or the background's brought forwards beyond me. So I was kind of really interested in playing with how I could really push, confuse Zoom as much as possible, and challenge that idea of like, when do I exist and when am I seen? So I made a few films that used, I made a kind of rehearsal process, and then again with Dancing Strong and with Dr. Kindred, we kind of made some, we played around with Zoom, having lots of cameras, and so lots of perspectives on the same person dancing, which is something that you can't do. How you can be so kind of close and you know, quite see my body in a very different way when I'm dancing with this camera, and yet at the same time, my body is suddenly in the, you know, in your home where you wouldn't be. The layering of the background, and I made a film. I was commissioned to make a film by RIBA for Sir David Adjaye's. He won the gold medal in for architecture, and I made some films using some images of his buildings and playing with the idea of how when you're lying, you know, like stuck in your house, there are places that are so much a part of you, your identity, that you remember them in your body, even though you're not physically there. So the sort of, I don't know if this is making sense, so maybe you need to see it, but the idea that I can suddenly become the background, like if I make the background a place that I really love, I can suddenly become the place that I really love. So my disappearance is controlled into the place that I love, rather than just a disappearance. That sort of playing with that, like how I can be present even when I'm not seen. All of that was sort of played around with this film, and then the other thing about it is that because it's a glitch, when the light changes suddenly, you can't disappear. So there's this other thing where you can be creating, you know, a dance where one day someone watching it gets this whole effect of you disappearing, and another day you disappear at different points, or you don't disappear at all. And what that says about how we are connected to what's around us.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I wanted to ask kind of like your thoughts on that. If you'd been doing anything interesting, and it seems like you have been. Is there anyone else's work though that you know at the moment that you would highlight as being particularly interesting or innovative? And you know, and perhaps we could celebrate some Black female dancers or choreographers that you might be working with, or draw our attention to some people that we can go away and, you know, find out some new cool stuff.
Yeah. So you sent me some questions you're going to ask me, and I get nervous about this kind of thing because I'm not very good at just drawing names out of places. And also what I was saying before about, you know, this sort of sense that, oh, that there's one person here that's so interesting, or like, oh, that's the one. And I think actually there's so much rich. I don't want to sort of sidestep the question, but there's so many interesting things going on and people doing things. And one of the things that, like, if going back to the book, like that, I kind of curated, edited it, but there's loads of chapters from all these amazing dancers and choreographers and scholars, and they're all still doing loads of cool stuff at the moment too.
Well, I'll tell you what then, I can rephrase this in two ways. One, we can jump in on the book. But the other thing is, I know you do some interesting work, and you mentioned architecture. I do want to like discuss the work that you do within architecture, because it sounds fascinating to me. And then it's and maybe you can talk about some of the work of Black female architects, I think is the group, isn't it? And then again, you mentioned travel around, the Dancing Strong group. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with those two groups, and then from there we can jump in on the book.
Okay, yeah. So I started working with Black female architects, is a group that was started when, you know, it's exactly what it says it is, that when they kind of noticed that, you know, there's not a lot of Black female architects that are represented. So I'm, you know, in everything, I'm trying to move away from there are not a lot of X, Y, and Z, because there's a lot of human beings on the world. They are there. It's just that they're not a lot of recognition, or there's not a lot of support for. So they too were noticing that their presence as Black females wasn't wasn't being supported and underpinned in sort of the system of architecture, and they sort of they've come together. They have lots of different projects that they work on. Recently, maybe this is one of the things that you saw. There's an exhibit at the Barbican that's there until December, that where there's a section of that was contributed to, and that was involved myself as well, and Jade and Ali, who made with the RSA, where we made a film in collaboration with Black female architects, just looking at sort of, I guess in a sense, reclaiming the histories around the RSA building, which is, you know, been designed by a lot of white male people, and sort of seeing the Black female presence there, and in the film, in a sense, literally doing that by being present there and re-establishing a connection with those buildings. And it's near Piccadilly, and Sarah B. I'm not very good at the last name, but she's a very famous person from South Africa in the 1800s,
Oh, wow.
who was kind of came over here and was performing and kind of put on display, really, for people would kind of go and look at her Black female body. Although she, you know, tried to perform, she was basically being kind of used for display. What's really amazing is that one of the theatres that she worked in is right there at Piccadilly, and where she lived is in the square, one of the squares that's in the film and associated with the RSA. And so, going back to that idea of space and time, we're sort of like tracing the steps of somebody that is maybe invisibilized, but by dancing and tracing the steps of their presence, bringing them back into engagement, like responding to them being there. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm suggesting that dance is about being responsive, like responding to the space, and a way of healing or dealing with some of the traumas that people have experienced is to respond to their presence, even if their presence isn't there physically anymore. Their presence is there in time. And so when you're dancing, responding to the presence of people that are less recognized for being part of that place, you draw on different energies, I suppose. And that's a good segue into the Reclaiming Ballet, because that was about the same thing. That, like, let's respond to the things that people sort of don't respond to. It's not that they don't exist or there aren't any. It's that they're not getting a much response. That gets back to the internet as well, right? Like, if you have a site and a lot of people visit it, suddenly it gets bigger. So these are kind of ways of, okay, let's visit some of these sites that are not getting as much visibility, and as the more you visit them, they become stronger, and their contribution is able to be engaged with.
And I guess again, to about one of your first points, then those people as well can, they can acknowledge their own significance, or, you know, to have other people acknowledging that. It gives you the power to move forward, doesn't it, in many ways as well? So let's jump in on the book, because you've just mentioned reclaiming in various contexts. So the book is called Reclaiming Ballet, and it's available now through Intellect Books, and you can go online and you can have a look at it and find out more. But I would like to discuss it with you today. So the book acknowledges and engages with marginalized individuals and communities within the history of ballet, generally speaking. And again, I think one of the important things is it's not talking about people, it's the people talking, reclaiming it for themselves and talking about themselves. So yeah, do you want to just tell us what the scope is, and how you came about the project, and yeah, just tell us a little bit about it, and some of the contributors and some of the chapters and things of that nature.
Yeah, so just to say that I would like to think of it not so much about marginalized, but more about moving the center to a different point. Like, so it's only marginalized if you're coming from a kind of mainstream perspective. And there's a practicality to that. So it is marginalized in that there's less funding, and funding helps you get things done. But in terms of sort of artistry, it's just, the book is just trying to move the center to somewhere else, which is what people have done. And then I've on in the front, you all were nice enough to put or edited / curated, which is a more unusual way of putting it. But it is definitely a curation of all these chapters from lots of other artists and scholars. The reason why I wanted to do that was because, in a sense, it's not really. My scholarship is not about sort of the history of ballet. It's about how we're all connected, this place thing. So the book is about trying to bring together a whole load of these connections, or like we were just saying with the internet, like a whole load of nodes, and seeing how the nodes kind of connect together and speak to each other, and how, if you're doing that from these different perspectives, maybe you get a more four-dimensional, enriched idea of what ballet is. And I care about ballet because it's an art form that I express myself through. So I don't want to see it being marginalized to just a few kind of rich white people's expression. So kind of enriching the practice itself means being able to respond to and engage with all the people that are part of what's made it what it is.
I kind of stop you there just to jump in for a second, because I think as an outsider, I mean, I've published a lot of work on dance, so I know a little bit about dance, more than your average person on the street perhaps. But I certainly wouldn't consider myself any kind of expert, nor have I ever really practiced dance. So I don't have that practical side knowledge either. So I was going to say, I think you've highlighted there one of the greatest challenges for ballet is I think, or dance in general, but ballet most definitely, certain traditional dances, but ballet most specifically is there's a misconception from the the everyday person in the street that it's a sort of old, antiquated, very white, highbrow, almost aristocratic art form that doesn't really live in a modern sense. And I know that's a misconception, and that's kind of what you're trying to achieve through a lot of your own work, is moving the center, and I guess shining light on what's cool and going on, like rather than just the people's outmoded kind of preconceptions about what ballet is. But ballet, what can ballet do outside of the work that people like yourself and your colleagues are doing? What can it do to change these perspectives? I mean, I guess fundamentally it needs to as an industry to shine light on the diversity of people and of practice and what's going on in the world. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so so here's a consideration. So you could say that people see it as some sort of white and what you just described, but yeah. But that again is people that are already a part of the mainstream. So for instance, when I went to Dance Theatre of Harlem, when I first went there, the whole area knew about Dance Theatre of Harlem. Like men would be sitting out and they'd have their Dance Theatre of Harlem baseball cap on, that would never, like they don't. When I went to the laundry, they'd ask me, what you're doing? Oh, I'm at Dance Theatre of Harlem. They knew what that was and what ballet was, and the whole community knew what that was. And so just saying, there's a sort of chapter about that. Arthur Mitchell had by Teresa Ruth Howard, where she talks about how Arthur Mitchell had open houses right from the very beginning. So ballet wasn't considered by that community. Like if you went up to someone in that community and said, you know, what's ballet? They didn't think it was a whole load of white people that, you know, like they knew no better than it was Dance Theatre of Harlem. And then same thing with Ballet Ethnic, with a chapter that Nina, who's also on the cover, writes about, you know, in that community, they have a community garden, people know about it. So one of the things that we could ask if we're really trying to move ballet forwards is not assume, you know, that maybe the people that think ballet is sort of white, rich people are also pretty much white people too. And, or, you know, the people that think, oh, it's straight people, maybe they're straight people. Like if you're in a queer community, you know what's going on in your community, and you can, so it's also moving the focus from the you know, moving the centers around for the focus, but also moving the centers around for the questions or for the realities. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. No, that's a very good point. So the book you've mentioned definitely contains points of view from professional dancers, practitioners, scholars, choreographers. Why was it so important for you to have all these different voices from different disciplines in the project, and what do you think they brought to it?
Yeah, so I part of it is you know, ignorance. That I kind of think that I didn't really grow up in a really strong academic, with a strong academic background. I'm sort of more come from a sort of artist-led background, and so I'm not really seeing a great big difference between scholars and dancers, except for in terms of writing down about dance, maybe the scholars' voices become louder. So it was really important for me to reach out to people that maybe wouldn't necessarily think of themselves as their loudest voice was in dance. Like maybe they would sooner choreograph something, or that their loudest voice wasn't in writing, rather that they'd sooner choreograph something or dance about it, to start to sort of balance out the whole spectrum of what it means to dance. Not the whole spectrum of opinion, but that part of dance is something that's wordless, and part of it is explained well in English, and then part of it might be explained well in, you know, in Yoruba or in French. So to try and just sort of get a sort of sense of a more like multifaceted reality of what dance is important to have, I think. Then people that are coming from all these different language, you know, first languages. My first language might be choreography, or someone else's first language might be writing, or someone else's first language might be dancing, and also to have that thing of people that are more established and people that are new. All of that is part of what dance, you know, part of what we're saying. We're saying that ballet is loads of things more than you think. And so the voices need to be that too. But it's also, as I say, I come from a sort of more naive space of sort of saying, I'd gone to something with somebody who was visiting England, and we'd gone to see, it was about diversity in ballet, and the conversation was so kind of ridiculous. Like the diversity was the choreographer was a young white man, not an old white man. Like that was the diversity. And I just felt so frustrated, like, oh, there's so much more we could be saying, and how embarrassing for me to have someone from another country sort of coming in, and this is the richness of our conversation. So I sort of just put out a thing like, who'd like to write about this? And then tried to organize it, and that's how it became curating. Tried to organize it so that there's sort of relationships between the different parts. And I say that's a little bit naive, because I think the way to do it with a little bit less stress and work is to sort of maybe target people. Like, would you write about this? I know you're already interested in it. Would you write about that? But I didn't do that. I wanted to sort of see, well, if do other people feel like this, and like, and what emerges from all of, if we just all suddenly talk about it. And that's how I curated it into these 4 parts.
I was going to say, yeah, I wanted to just tap into that and talk a little bit about, well, it's really interesting, your process, first of all. And yeah, I can imagine in hindsight, yeah, it's from my experience, it can be tricky putting out a call. And then, of course, you know, being the editor, you then have to herd all the cats and all the different moving parts and everything. So you've done an extremely good job of that to deliver such a fantastic work. But yeah, tell us a little bit about the 4 sections, and then perhaps just highlight a few interesting chapters, just so people can get a kind of a sense of the style of the book and kind of like the method or whatever.
Yeah, so in trying to sort of see threads through the different chapters that sort of came to answer that call, I sort of organized it into along the idea of so the first part is about histories, or it's called Histories, and it's trying to maybe ask some questions to kind of debunk the sort of more narrow idea of what ballet is. I think all the chapters are good, so I'm going to say very quickly a little bit about different sections. Yeah. So in the first chapter is one that I wrote, and I can come back to that. But in that, I'm trying to set up the idea that there's a lot going on. And I use this metaphor, for instance, of a mansion house where one room is really well looked after and kind of preserved, and the rest of the house is kind of falling apart. And to sort of say, there's going to come a point when if the rest of the house falls apart, that one room is not going to manage to keep itself going. You know, you need to come out of the room and engage with the rest of the house, kind of thing. But that's trying to set up the idea, look, there's lots going on. It may be not as well underlined for you, but there's all these things that are going to be going on in the rest of the book. And then the next chapter, and I'm so bad at saying everybody's names, so I'm just going to say what the chaps.
Yeah, sure, no one's going to get offended anyway. And tell you what, people
okay.
Look online and check the book out in greater detail.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So Julie Glitch and Molly Faulkner talk a little bit about the canon, the sort of female canon. Why aren't we more aware of that? Because the sort of ballet canon tends to be is a sort of male choreographer who pretty much tells pretty sort of cis straight narratives about men and women coming together or fighting or whatever. And so there are a lot of people that have actually done other great works, and they're by women, and they're not necessarily all about just a sort of heterosexual male view. And then Jocelyn Deans talks a little about sort of she's done so much research about ballet and sort of Black African American dancers, history of ballet in the Americas. And then the last chapter in that is by Dr. Sandy Bourne, and hers is about seeing the presence of the African diaspora in traditional Western narrative ballets. So that first section, Histories, is actually sort of challenging, is it that, there are more histories than you realize, or what is your thought about, your thought about the history maybe could be expanded by these chapters. And then going from this massive macro thing, the next section is about the sort of micro, like the knowledge is what happens in your body when you come across these grand narratives or these histories that maybe write you out of reality, or don't kind of include your own history or your own experience. So in that section is more sort of personal stories around how people have kind of come to have relationships with ballet. I don't know what time it is, but so shall I?
No,
Shall I keep going?
really interesting. No, this is really
Yeah.
interesting. It's really important.
Okay. I'll go quickly to the third part is, given that there's these kind of grand narratives that we maybe could challenge, and how that feels in the reality of the personal. The next one is about resiliences. So out of that kind of maybe disconnect sometimes, these resiliences are sort of born, and a lot of those resiliences become artistic processes and artistic practices, and they've led to moving the form forwards. And then the last part is consciousnesses, which is around a little bit around, this is where people wrote about a sense of, okay, so now we're aware of this, or we have been aware of this, and these are the things that we're doing, or these are some things that sort of move us into, if we move the center to the edge here, and then this is how we expand in our new center around. And the whole book is, although it's sort of talking about gender types and sort of queer theory, as well as black, and just different identities that are not mainstream, sort of cis gender, male centered.
Yeah.
So that's how those sort of four things fit together. This more general thing, then how that feels in your body, then what resilience is, but build from that, and then the consciousness is that the sort of how we use that as a resource to, and have been using that as a resource to keep the form going.
No, it's brilliant. Thank you. I think it's really important you gave us a little description of that, because it makes a lot more sense of how it all integrates. It's a really good book, and I urge everyone to go and check it out. You can check it out at intellectbooks.com. And we'll also be showcasing it at the DSA, the Dance Studies Association, from tomorrow. So if anyone is attending, please do drop by and take a look at the book in person. This will be my first physical conference in nearly 2 years, so that's going to be an interesting an interesting experience. But I'm really glad that it's a practice-led conference, and it's going to be focusing on dance. And I think it's going to be a really interesting one to get us back into the flow of these academic arts and humanities events. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to just very briefly ask if anyone has any very burning questions that they would like to put to Adesola. We will try and get through to them. But in the meantime, I just wanted to ask you if you had maybe if you had any advice, whether it be for early career scholars or practitioners who are kind of making that transition into more of an academic or scholarly teaching kind of as an academic, what any advice or top tips or anything from your career and your diverse career?
I think it's really, it's obviously it's really important to kind of respect your elders and the people that have kind of created things and the people that you admire. But it's also important to know that we're all, there's a crisis going on, which is the world, how we're looking after the world. And we're sort of multi-species, the multiplicities of the earth, we're losing that. And so finding the thing that you're passionate about and your voice within that is really important, because your voice and your expression can add to the energy and the help that we're in sort of dire straits. We need to look after the earth and each other for the generations to come. And COVID has just kind of flipped, like it's underlined where there's poverty and where there's deprivation, and it's underlined where we've really not taken care of the environment. And so we're sort of in this together, and so you're really important. We're all really important, and we're important as part of a network, as a loving, engaged network that is responsive to each other and responsible for each other.
Well, I think that's great advice, and I think that's a really heartfelt comment, and one that we should all definitely hold dear at the moment. And I think that feels optimistic as well. I think, you know, we need to be optimistic and strive to make these changes. So, Adesola, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure, and I think we'll have to have another one of these. So I didn't get into half of my questions, and I advise everyone out there just to go and. Do you want to just give people a couple of your Facebook, sorry, your Instagram handle will be on the bottom of this video when it gets posted. But would you just like to maybe give people a bit more information about where they can find out more about you, your website, etc.?
Yeah, so I have a website called adesolaakinleye.com that has links to I did some really interesting podcasts during lockdown with talking to some really interesting people, and the links to the films and books and journal articles that I've written and choreography. And then, as I said, I work with Dr. Helen Kindred with Dancing Strong Movement Lab, and that's another website where you could sort of see work and what we're doing at the moment. I wanted to thank you very much. Thanks for interviewing me, and it's been really nice. And I was quite nervous about getting on, but it all worked out okay, and it's been good.
It's been brilliant. I have to say this has been one of my favourite in conversations. You know, not that I should say that, but no, they're all wonderful, and there's a lot of them on our Instagram TV. So there's a wealth and depth of different scholars and practitioners talking about all sorts of things. So just everyone go and check that out. But no, thank you so much. It's been really interesting. It's been lively, and yeah, I'm going to go back and look through this and go back and read some more of the book. It's been a while since I've had the opportunity to dip into it, but I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to presenting it over the coming days. So great. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for your time. It's been awesome.
Thank you.